Hey everyone, it's Synth Designer back again with another video. Today I'm going to be starting a series that looks at Serum 2 and all its features and all its glory. If you're not familiar with Serum, the latest release of Serum 2 just came out not long ago, and I want to start exploring some of the new features as well as explore some of the standard features that were on Serum 1. And I'm going to take you through a full guide for Serum over the coming weeks and months. And we're going to break down as many aspects as we can of Serum 2 and explore just what makes it unique and how to use it. So if you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever, this is going to apply to you no matter what level you are. We're going to explore basically as many features as possible without obviously dwelling on every single minute little detail. It's up to you to explore this synth on your own, but I'm hoping to kind of guide you through everything. So what we'll look at today are the oscillators and wavetables and everything you need to know about those. The way I'll go through this guide is I'll obviously be looking at Serum 2, the actual plugin, but I'm also going to guide you through some of the user guide. Now I know some of you will probably find that a little bit boring, but believe me, going through the manual is very important and really helpful. You wouldn't believe how many questions I bet that you've had if you're a user that will actually be in there and answered. So let's start off by checking out what is a wavetable. Now, this is basically the most basic aspect of Serum and what makes it unique. And for that, we're going to turn right to the guide. And we're just going to look at what is a wavetable. A wavetable is a small amount of digital audio, sample data, or waveform that is played back in a looping fashion. The frequency or pitch of the resulting note is determined by the rate, the speed between the repeats at which the waveform is played. The tone, timbre, and harmonics of the sound is determined by the content of the waveform. Okay, now if you're not familiar with music theory, sound theory, that is pretty meaningless to you. So let's look at it in a practical sense. The default shape is always going to be what's called a saw wave. And when you look at wave shapes and the most basic shapes, you'll find them here. And it starts off with a sine wave, which is the most fundamental of wave shapes. I'm not going to get into all the details of fundamental wave shapes. I've done videos on this on the past, so go check those out. But the basic shapes include a sine wave, and then you could change the wavetable position to get a saw, a triangle, square, and various pulses that they've included. Where Serum 2 really is really cool is that there's now 3 different oscillators here. If you're not familiar with an oscillator, it's essentially what produces sound. We are not going to get into all these types of synths today. We're just going to focus on the wavetables, and we're going to focus on how to create these sounds and a lot of these different parameters here. So again, if you're not familiar with Serum 1, we had only 2 types of oscillators before with a sub and a noise, and now we have 3. So it's a nice little upgrade there. But let's just create a sound. Let's go back and take a saw wave here. So as you can hear, this sound versus this sound quite a bit different. The saw wave is the harshest essentially, whereas the sine wave is the smoothest. And if you think about it, when we saw the definition, that makes sense. Since these are looping, essentially, if you think of a sine wave and how it would essentially loop over and over, it's a very smooth flowing thing, whereas a saw wave would have these kind of very harsh angles. And when you're creating the sound, that essentially makes it sound that harsh, right? It's not a smooth flowing sound, it's a very harsh sound. When you're looking at it up here, you can see you could change the octave very simply. You can change it by semitones. You could change it with a fine tune as well. And that's starting to sound unpleasant. However, if you know how to use LFOs, then you can attach it here and it actually can sound really interesting and make it sound even a little bit more analog, a little bit more detuned, which is pleasant in a way if you really work it right. We're not going to do that right now. And there's also this coarse pitch, which again, we're not going to get into too much, but again, there's various functions where that really comes into play. For the novelty and the newness of Serum 2, let's take a look at these Unison settings. In Serum 1, we essentially had this basic unison capability. And of course, this creates nice pads, nice wide sounds. But right here, we have this little toggle, this settings, and we have a whole bunch of different modes. So let's just start off with that and take a look at these. So we have linear, super, EXP, inverted, and random. So you might be thinking, okay, what are these? Well, let's take a look at linear. So when we go back, here's what the unison setting looks like, right? You can see this thing up the middle, and when we change it, it goes up or down. And you can see the wider we get it, or the more unison we give it, kind of the bigger the sound it gets, right? Well, so you can see these lines essentially. These green lines are the width, and we could detune it more or less, whereas this yellow line stays in the center because that is essentially the fundamental sound of it. We can also blend it so the center is more pronounced or the sides are more pronounced. But this mode here is what gives it an interesting kind of dynamic. So if we change it to, say, EXP here, you could see all of a sudden these lines are different. They're in different positions than when we had it on linear. Well, linear is essentially that. It's going to be a completely linear amount of detuning the more you give it or the less you give it, whereas EXP is exponential. So the more detuned, the more exponentially detuned it gets. And it could get very detuned very quickly. Super, you can see here, it also kind of makes it more pronounced without it being exponential. And then we have inverted. This one's kind of interesting. So it actually changes differently based on how much unison you give it. So it's actually a little bit wider standardly when we have less unison here. So it doesn't actually get wider here. And you can see it's a unison of 12 and 15, and it's detuned high, but it's actually more detuned in a way with 5 voices of unison than with 12 there or 13. So that essentially inverts the amount of detuning. Just to give it a little bit more clarity, let's go to page 47 here, and you can see here where we're getting some of this information. This is again just to kind of give you a sense of what this user guide and / manual can give you. As I said here, for example, inversion, the detuning behavior is inverted, with lower voices detuned more sharply compared to higher ones. And you can see the rest of the explanations here as well. Now, this last one here is kind of cool, and it really gives you a cool ability to make things a little bit more interesting and not as static. As you can see, it randomizes based on the voices you choose. To me, this kind of makes it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more analog feel. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. Sometimes it could sound pretty standard, but it's never quite the same, and it changes based on the detuning that you give it. So that's a really cool feature. Let's just go back to linear for a second and take a look at this stack setting here. This one is another new feature, which is really kind of neat here. You'll see these 12 1x, 12 2x, etc. These are semitones. So 12 semitones is 1 octave. So if I have it off, I'm playing here. If I press this, you could hear there's that higher setting or that higher note there as well, which is that 1 octave up, which is really cool because it's almost like giving you an extra wavetable here that we didn't have before, or an extra oscillator, I should say. So without even adding a whole other oscillator, because you can do that. You could do one oscillator on 1 octave, then the same setting on another oscillator with an octave higher. But this just gives you an extra kind of boost there of 1 octave up without adding another oscillator. The same can be done with 12 times 2. And as you can imagine, 12 times 3, it just gets higher and higher. So that's a really neat kind of thing that you can add. And of course, you can imagine that it's going to give you kind of a different flavor to the sound, right? It's not just going to be that standard octave. It's going to give you those extra octaves. Here we have 12 plus 7. And if you're not familiar with music theory, a 7th is a perfect 5th up, which is a really pleasing sound. Just to give us a frame of reference, let's go back to off. So again, we're not adding an extra oscillator here. We're just getting that nice standard tone plus that 7th above it. The same, as you can imagine, goes above here as it was in the 12 times 2 or 3. This just goes up octaves. Then over here, we have a minus 12. So for frame of reference, that minus 12 is an octave down. So without adding a sub-layer here, we again have that extra kind of thickness to it. And then the 12 minus 24 will be 2 octaves down. So again, the versatility of Serum 2 is coming here. Without adding any more oscillators, you're all of a sudden getting extra tones that you didn't before. Another cool feature here of Serum 2 is this width capability. So you have all this voice of unison, but you can also control the width here. So now you have a mono kind of setting here, but with all these voices of unison. So you're getting that nice thick sound without taking up all this stereo space, which is a huge thing for, say, leads. If you want a nice saw lead, kind of a super saw lead, but you don't want to have the width, like that whole stereo spectrum taken up by just the lead, then you can just go right here and to turn it down or turn it up. And as you can imagine, you can very easily automate this, say at the start of a song or something. The range here is essentially kind of like the chorus effect, if you think about it. When you're adding unison, you're essentially adding the same sound over and over, which kind of gives it that chorus capability. Let's go back to the user manual. As you can see here, the range is explained here. It's the extent or range of detuning applied to the unison voices, determining how far apart in pitch the individual voices are spread around the central frequency of the original sound. So again, it's usually defaulted very low, and that's kind of that pleasing sound. If we have it at 0, it kind of kills that chorus effect. If we have it very high, it detunes it more and more. So that's just another way of detuning things. Wavetable position is actually really interesting as well. So another new feature here of Serum 2, this won't work very well with a basic saw, but if we were to take a different wavetable position, so back out of settings, and say go to analog, or maybe even a digital, let's go to analog, some sort of different saw here maybe. Let's do MB saw, so wavetable position. As you can see, that changes. By going into the settings and the wavetable position, you essentially can now determine where you want these settings to take place, and it doesn't just have to be in its original wavetable position. It can affect only certain parts of the wavetable. If you're not familiar with a wavetable, of course, it is a shifting, dynamic feature of Serum, right? It's not meant to be one thing. Of course, we had the basic shapes before, but now we have the actual wavetable changing. And that is what makes it really unique and can give you so many different options. This could be automated, and it can also give you different flavors of a sound without you having to switch wavetables constantly or different oscillators. So that is an amazing part of Serum and Serum's 2 ability to just make different wavetable positions have different unison capabilities. Now, switching out of the settings, you saw here we have this Warp 1 and Warp 2 feature. Another new feature of Serum 2 is the ability to have 2 warp capabilities. So before, Serum 1 only had the 1. Now we have 2. So I'm not going to go into detail for all these warp features because there's so many, but let's just go to, say, the Alt Warp, which is kind of the traditional ones that they had, Bend Plus. And you can see, just by playing around, you could get really different sounds. And again, this is a nice feature to be automating. And then you can also add another different type of warp capabilities. The cool new one that I saw is the ability to distort your wavetable right from this position, whereas before you had to go to the effects. Serum 2 now gives you the ability to distort in the effects as well as through the warp position. So if we were to add the tube distortion here, so you're really getting a ton of different ways to change up and to make your sound unique, all from one oscillator, all through this kind of basic wavetable position. We've barely just scratched the surface here, but as you can see, there's just so many different options already. The pan and the level should be kind of self-explanatory. Panning from left to right and level is just the volume. Of course, it's not an upgrade if you're not getting new different ways of creating your sound. So Serum 2 now has its own wavetables, tons of different new ones I haven't even explored. I highly recommend going into it and just checking these out. I have barely scratched the surface on these, but more than just your analog, digital, spectral, and vowel before, you get all sorts of new ones here that are pretty special and can just give you so many more options already. So hopefully you kind of get a sense of some of these new features from the wavetables that you can use in Serum 2. Remember, this is just the beginning of our journey of exploring Serum 2. Over the next several weeks and months, I'm going to be kind of taking a deep dive similar to this video. If you want to see something explored in Serum 2, please stay patient as there's a good chance I will get to it. Of course, leave comments down below and let me know what you think of this video and what you would like to see. My sound design videos will, of course, continue, and I'm going to be exploring all sorts of sounds in Serum 2, and you can expect lots of new preset packs that will come out of this, which will always be free. If you're not familiar with the channel, go to synthdesigner.com. You could download tons of presets right now, absolutely free, for Serum 1, which are compatible with Serum 2, and you can expect lots more to come. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.